Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. With me today, I have Charles M. Jones. He is the emotion decoder, an emotion scientist, in fact. He's a leadership coach and trainer on his own specific frameworks. And I have to say, I've been looking forward to this one, and I'd like you all to join me in welcoming Charles. He's this pioneering guy with over 40 years of groundbreaking research on flow, empathy, negativity, trauma, and stress. And in fact, his journey began with a life-changing experience that set him on a path to understanding how he can transform fear and trauma into powerful tools for leadership and personal growth. And he's developed some innovative frameworks like the emotional responsibility, just to name one. And he's been revolutionizing how organizations cultivate empathetic leaders and improve workplace dynamics. So, welcome to the show, Charles.
Thank you very much, Ross. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, I'd like to start off, I'd love to begin the conversation with perhaps if you could share this terrifying near miss incident that turned out to be this life changing moment for you, Charles.
Sure. So it was 1982 in the summer in the Alps. I was on vacation with my nuclear family. I was 2 years into my college career, and we were on a narrow two-lane road. To our right was a cliff, to the left was a rock wall, and we were stuck going uphill behind a very slow-moving truck. And I was driving, my father was in the passenger seat. So we're driving on the right side of the road for those of you in the UK. And he could see the road turn to the right and it was clear of vehicles. So he gave me the okay to pull out. I hit the accelerator. I'm going past the truck on my right, and suddenly the road turns to the left. My father had been mistaken and didn't realize. And I found myself face to face with an oncoming truck. So both trucks lay on their horn, and this bolt of fear, more intense than I'd ever experienced in my life before or since, just hits me, and I am utterly terrified. And yet, my mind is crystal clear. There's no tension anywhere in my body. My body's completely relaxed. Energy is just surging all through my body, and some part of me watches in amazement as this dialogue takes place between my conscious mind and what I would later understand was my need to protect my assets, the things that I valued most in the world, all four of which, my father, mother, sister, were in the car with me. And so my first thought was to slam on the brakes and scoot back and get behind the truck so the other truck could pass its way. And my subconscious, which, as you know, processes information hundreds of thousands of times faster than our conscious mind, returns a little video of the car rolling down the cliff. So I slam on the accelerator and I use the Doppler effect, the changes in the frequencies of the horn of the vehicle to my right and in front of me, to navigate where I am, because there's not time to look both directions. And I managed to slide between the two trucks. So half a mile or so, a couple kilometers down the road, there's a scenic overview. I pull off and I look, and my family, they're just white as sheets. They're just, no one's saying anything. And I feel better than I've ever felt in my life. So I get out of the car, I'm looking at this beautiful view of the Alps, and I'm just reveling in this state where my mind is quiet. I think only when I need to. I just feel like a force of nature. I've just done this amazing thing, and it feels totally natural to me. I feel convinced that this is how human beings were meant to live. And um, I just made a promise to myself of, hey, I'm going to figure out how to live as much of my life in this state as I can. Now, you mentioned the state of flow. This is a couple of years before Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi wrote the book Flow. And there's Maslow talked about peak experiences, but there's very little in the Western literature, about this. So it sent me on this lifelong pursuit to learn as much as I could about flow. And I found there's references in pretty much every tradition. They have names like Sahaja Samadhi and things like that. And all the people who have this experience, very similar to mine, this feels natural to us. So, what is it that takes us out of this state of flow? And that has become the basis of my research and career since.
As I was listening to your story, I thought, okay, so 1982 version of Charles, does he become a racing car driver that wants to pursue these moments of bliss and joy of living in that, sense and sensation? And you chose a different path of a scientific approach, perhaps from engineering background and thoughts to those things to want to, and you describe yourself as a decoder of things, of research, and the ability to understand from self, to help others understand and teach parts of that. So what was your kind of first calls and journeys into understanding that role of emotions for you?
Well, um, it wasn't. It actually wasn't obvious to me in that moment, or even shortly afterwards, that emotions were key to this whole thing. Um, the the first place that I went was, okay, where uh, are there traditions out there that are cultivating this state of flow? So as part of this, I had a daily meditation practice for 35 years, as an example. And um, but the thing that kept nagging on me is, okay, if this feeling or intuition I had that this is our natural state is correct, what is it that pulls us out of this state? And the typical answer, and in fact, you even see part of this answer in Csikszentmihalyi's work, is this idea that negative emotions are what pull us out of our natural state. And yet, as a scientist, if you're a theorist, if you're a science theorist, what you do is you create falsifiable hypotheses and then you put them to the test. And if you have a single observation that disproves the hypothesis, that doesn't conform to the hypothesis, you have disproven the hypothesis. And you go back to the drawing board to find a new hypothesis. So the hypothesis that negative emotions are problematic and pull us out of this natural state of flow and peak performance that we can be in, I had clear disproof of that in that experience. Here I am in a state of fear, and yet I'm not stressed. I'm completely composed. So those were some of the key things. So if negative emotions don't cause stress, or for those of you who may be scientists, what Hans Selye would call distress, emotional distress, if negative emotions aren't the source of stress, and as Hans Selye would say, the negative emotion can go into distress or eustress, this peak performance kind of state, what determines what direction it's going to go, right? And it was actually many, many years later, it was in the early 2000s, that I discovered, and I believe conclusively, what it is that dictates whether, when a negative emotion appears, whether you will go into a state that's characterized by um, stress and reactivity and a lack of composure, or you will move into a state similar to the one that I was in the Alps.
And it's very interesting, isn't it? This pursuit of understanding of a physical response that will be electromagnetic in terms of production of chemicals, production of connections of charge in the brain, to what choice then is the reactional response between the calmness or the paralyzed. What do we then do? And what's the gate? What's the filter that says turn left or turn right to that person in dealing with that stimulus? So I'm fascinated. What did you discover were the factors that meant it went one way or another way in its outcomes from that process happening in the physical body?
So what I discovered is there's two things that there's kind of the decision point that you're talking about, which turns out to not be a conscious decision point. I'll go back to that in a second. And then there are structural things in the brain that may or may not be there depending on the person's history and upbringing. So to go to the easier one to explain first, if when an emotion arises, there are two paradigms through which human beings will interpret that emotion. Okay, so one of those paradigms is, I feel the way I feel because of what's happening in the world around me. Okay, and this is the prevalent dominant theory of emotion that you will find in psychology textbooks, emotional intelligence classes, and everything else. Actually, in emotional intelligence class, you have a slight twist on that, which is, okay, I feel the way I feel, not directly because of what's happening to me, but because of the story I'm telling myself about what's happening out there. Okay, and if you go that route, then negative emotions are going to lead to distress and a lack of composure and irrational decisions and whatnot. Because that view, that understanding of emotions misses the most important part of the emotional causation process, which is between something happening out here in the world and the emotion arising. There's a subconscious process where all of your subconscious needs are saying, okay, given what's happening out there in the world, what are the implications for whether or not we are or are not on track to meet our needs? And let me give a couple examples of these needs. So the need that arose for me in the Alps was, okay, as soon as the road turned to the left, okay, then there was immediately some anxiety in me because my need to anticipate risks and mitigate them was like, well, my dad was wrong. My dad was incorrect. The road went to the left, not to the right. That means there's the possibility there may be a vehicle here. Okay, so I have a little bit of anxiety. And then half a second later, when I see the truck, it's like, oh, no, that's fear. Because fear is the emotion that arises when the subconscious concludes that you're not on track to protect an asset that you value. And here, the four assets I value most in the world are, I'm not on track to protect them. So if I recognize that I'm not on track to protect them, then the fear becomes something which is, two things are going on. One is the feeling of the fear is calling on my conscious mind to stop whatever else it's doing and put its full attention on supporting the subconscious and getting back on track to protect the assets of the people in the car, right? And simultaneously, that emotion is affecting a series of physiological changes that optimize my being's capacity to protect assets. Okay, so emotions. So and then here's the other piece. In that first view of emotions, the emotion and the underlying need are being conflated. They're not differentiated. So, in traditional emotional intelligence, there's this belief that emotions drive behavior, but that's categorically not true. Emotions do not drive behavior. Needs drive behavior. So these psychological needs, like mitigating risks, protecting assets, achieving goals, upholding your ethics, personifying ideals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I found about 40 of these. These subconscious needs are really the big drivers. They're driving your behavior, they're driving their emotion, and they're the ones that are responding to questions you ask yourself in the subconscious response. It's the needs that are responding to the questions that you're asking. So if you recognize that the emotion's being generated by a need and you turn your attention immediately to the need, you enter into a state of partnership and union with your subconscious in which you are in this state of flow, right? But if you're misinterpreting what the emotion is telling you, you fall into a state where essentially instead of focusing on how do I get back on track to meet this need, you tend to enter a very kind of judgmental, negative kind of state where you're looking for someone or something to blame for the appearance of this negative emotion.
It's interesting. I had myself, as I was listening to you, trying to understand, and I follow a lot of Joe Dispenza's work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Joe Dispenza, where he talks about emotions as being the language of the body and thoughts being the language of the mind, and how, between those two things, context really matters. The body can be in one way having the same kind of reactions, but the context of how you apply to that can mean the difference between, oh, I'm experiencing bliss or fear. There could be very similar physical things going on, but the neural pathways, trauma, what has been learnt before, might then dictate different things. One might be a need, another might be a desire in terms of what kind of situation we may be in, to protect or to promote in certain point. And you also mentioned there about sort of cohesion, to be in alignment of subconscious and consciousness, and that being described maybe as flow as a word, or as other languages use different words for that. Why is this relevant, and how is this helpful for people at work and people dealing with change, and people in particularly, I know you work a lot with leaders. So whilst this sort of theory, things that are going on, some people are maybe nodding, some are going, that's not what I've heard about emotional intelligence. They might have some dissonance between what they're saying. Let's try and make it some relevant to things they're facing in work, in leadership during change. How does that apply, Charles?
Sure. Let me give a very kind of small example, then we can kind of extrapolate from there. So let's say every month you're responsible for producing a report. And every month, the day before the report is due, you reach out to the coworker of yours that can get you the sales data you need to incorporate into that report. And this particular month, you reach out to her and she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't get you the data today. I can get it to you by noon tomorrow. Your meeting where you're presenting is at 2 o'clock tomorrow. In the past, it's taken you 4 hours to integrate the data. So immediately your subconscious concludes, hey, we're not on track to achieve our goal of delivering a report on time. And frustration arises. Okay? So if you are interpreting that frustration as having been caused by being in response to what just happened, you now believe that you are frustrated with your coworker. My coworker is so frustrating to work with, right? And you're really the only move that is going to occur to you on how you're going to resolve this frustration is to get your coworker to get you the data anyway, right? Today. So can I bribe her? Can I coerce her? Do I go to her boss and, et cetera, et cetera? That's the only option that's going to occur to you. And that option might work. But in the meantime, you're going to be kind of judgmental and in this kind of negative mental state with regard to your coworker. Contrast that with, oh, I'm frustrated. Oh, well, given that my coworker says she can't get me the data till noon tomorrow, I'm not on track to achieve my goal of delivering the report on time. What are my options? Wow, I have a lot of options. One is I could deliver the report without the sales data since no one seems interested in that anyway in this particular meeting. Two, I could postpone the meeting. Three, I could remember that actually with the Excel macros that I built last month, if I get it by noon, I actually will have the report done by 2, and it's okay. I am on track to achieve my goal. Like all these other options, this creativity, this innovation appears for you, and you're in a much better relationship with yourself and with the other person. So that's a very trivial small example, but here's why it's important. When I've done studies in Fortune 500 companies, so high performing organizations, I found that 70% of the time that an employee is frustrated, they are in what I call the emotional victimhood view, where they are blaming their emotion on what it is that just happened. And only 30% are they in this emotional responsibility view, where they're immediately solving for the need, right? They're solving for the problem. Problem is a need you're not on track to meet. And what's further interesting is if you break down the data even further, turns out that actually a majority of senior executives instantly respond to their frustration from a state of emotional responsibility. It makes sense. If they didn't, they wouldn't be good at achieving goals, right? If you're not interpreting your negative emotions correctly, you're not going to be good at fulfilling the underlying need. So the underlying need for frustration is achieving goals. And the lower you get in the organization, the more likely people are going to be in emotional victimhood. So if you just taught people that one thing, think about the increase in productivity that you'd see in that organization from that one emotion, right? Now let's go to one that's much more interesting from an adaptability point of view. So anxiety. If you think the reason you're anxious is because something bad might happen, okay, you're attributing your anxiety to awareness that something bad might happen or there's some uncertainty in the future, then you're in emotional victimhood. You're going to start spinning out. You're going to need a glass of wine at the end of the day or a Xanax on a regular basis. But if you recognize, oh, thank you, subconscious, you're alerting me that there's a risk, there's a what if, that should it happen, harm is going to come to me or the company, organization, whatever it is. And you're alerting me to that fact. And then if I allow myself to feel the anxiety throughout my body, it actually optimizes my frame of mind to identify worst case scenarios and evaluate contingency plans. Someone that understood that very well was Andy Grove, who was the COO of Intel. And Intel, of course, at the time of this story, they were making memory chips in an industry which is highly disruptive. A competitor brings out an innovation and you're out of business the next day, kind of thing, right? So here's an industry where there's a tremendous amount of change. And in one of these sessions where he invited people to really feel into their anxiety and put all the what ifs on the whiteboard, one of his subordinates said, well, what if a competitor floods the market with inexpensive memory chips and suddenly we Intel we can't compete, we're out of business. And that what if, that leaning into the anxiety, figuring out what the underlying need from the subconscious is trying to tell him. And remember, the subconscious is processing implications, has access to all our memories, our sensory data, process information 250,000 times faster than the conscious mind, right? We should listen to it. It's this massive chat GPT. It can have problems with bias and other things, but the conscious mind is important for, and it doesn't have the rational thinking skills, but it's a tremendous resource. And so out of that discussion at Intel came the idea of the CPU chip, and $8 billion and 8 years later, 2 months ahead of the Japanese flooding the market with inexpensive memory chips, Intel had pivoted to this new business. That's an example of adaptability.
And it's the framing that's so important, isn't it? To use these levers, these signals, as you talk about, the subconscious early warning signals, anxiety, thank you, the joy of it, and the driver in which it can stimulate innovation. And it's great in theory, great when it happens in practice, but in the moment, in the reality for many people, when they're facing that, they're so programmed to not operate as a driver innovation, but a driver of procrastination, a driver of enclosed, put the blinkers on, and we go into either armament or dissidence. We'll avoid or will armor against, rather than use it almost like a judo move of let's use the power of that negative in against itself to allow it to stimulate creativity. And what a great story of driving adaptation and change that is chosen, not chosen for us, and that ability to be ahead from it. But a lot of it also takes, and something I'd like your input on, is around unlearning. So we will have sensory emotions that go, instead of anxiety, it'll go and give us a clap. It'll give us an applause. It'll go, well done, Charles. Well done, Charles. Thank you. You've helped me. You've done this. And it'll further give us feedback that gives us emotional relationship to the way we've done something. And when it's hard to adapt and change, when we're still getting positive signals, not necessarily negative signals. So you've talked about anxiety, fear, those sorts of things to stimulate. What about if we're still getting positive signals, joy, happiness, check at the end of the month, whatever it is, for doing what we're doing, and we didn't know that just around the corner it turned left, not right, and there was a truck coming? And there was no early warning sign of anxiety. There was no early warning sign of those things because we were blind to them, because we were doing what we were doing. How can emotions, help us in that? And how might they be more challenging when they're, in inverted commas, traditionally seen as positive emotions around change?
Well, a couple thoughts. So one is in my experience. So you talked about unlearning, and the biggest unlearning project I've had in my life is unlearning the emotional victimhood interpretation of emotions, right? And if my theory was to be one way to test the theory is if this emotional responsibility state is natural to us, then at what point in history did human beings start shifting from the emotional responsibility interpretation to emotional victimhood interpretation? And I believe it happened 2,600 years ago. And there's a particular moment in history where it happened, and texts prior to that, people are interpreting their emotions the way I teach in my classes. And soon after that, people are interpreting it in this, I feel bad because of what's happening to me, or I feel good because of what's happening to me. So there's a lot of unlearning to be done there. And in the work I've done with myself and training my clients, what I found is that actually there's the suppression of awareness of emotions is such a practice skill that actually the early warning signs are there. They just never reach the level of conscious awareness because
We play whack-a-mole. We hit them. Go away, go away, go away.
well,
Over time.
or we're just armored. So if the way people suppress awareness of emotions within themselves is they tense the muscle groups through which the emotions somatically express themselves. So if, for instance, at the end of the day, you tend to have tension in your jaws or you grind your teeth at night, it's because you're in the habit of suppressing awareness of your frustration. If you've got tension between your shoulder blades, you've been suppressing awareness of some anxiety. If you're not breathing into your upper chest, you may be suppressing some resentment. right? And all throughout the body. If you have a tight sphincter, you're holding your sphincter tight so you don't have to experience some fear. So I think these messages are very subtle and actually just learning to relax into and inhabit our body and develop our interoceptive skills. That alone increases how much of the awareness that our subconscious already has we become consciously privileged to. So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is there's a concept in positive psychology which flow has some relationship to, where when positive emotions arise, to savor those emotions. Well, I would say go one step further, not just savor the emotions, but also take that as an opportunity to um, stay connected to the need that is generating the emotion. And let me explain why that's so important. If you feel really good and you're in this emotional victimhood view and you're attributing your feeling good to what's happening to you, and that's all the further you go, then neurons that fire together wire together, and your savoring is strengthening those strategies. But it's strengthening the strategies disconnected from the underlying need, where there's an opportunity that you savor not only in the awareness of the strategy that's meeting your need, but also the need that's being met. You remain much more adaptable because you're much less identified with the strategy, and you're much more identified with someone that meets that need.
I've got a few things going in my head again here, and I see multiple pathways for how these strategies can be maybe positive for us or negative to our well-being, our health, all of these things in pursuit of a state. So a bad example of that would be I want a state of happiness, of joy. I've made a connection to that through a strategy that might be externally provided through drugs, drink, various addictions that might be bad for society, bad for me. And on the other side, it could be still bad, but perceived socially as okay, workaholism, various different things. Or it could be good for me and good for socially, connectedness. You talked about 35-year daily meditation practice to get in connection to your own, body introspection. I did some work with Amanda Blake. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work from Stanford. Her book is called Your Body is Your Brain. It's all about somatic work where trauma lives in your muscles long after an event. You have a bad phone call with your boss. You might be able to get over it with a bit of talking, but your body is still living in that, situation long after you talked about it. You hold the tension in various parts. So how can we, you know, deal with those when maybe many leaders don't even realize they're in that state where their body is so dysfunctional because they've been hitting it with stress and trauma and experiences in the way that they've labeled them and remembered them. They don't even know what relaxed is. They don't even know what flow or coherence or those kind of bits are. If people are in that, how would they recognize it? And maybe what's the connection with your frameworks to get out of that?
So you use the word trauma, and from the so this new theory of emotion I've created, it's more than a theory of emotion, right? It's a theory of the interaction of thought, behavior, subconscious programming, emotion, and views our psyche as being comprised of a singular conscious mind and this multiplicity of subconscious needs. And the weak link in this system, if you will, is that the conscious mind, the most newest evolutionary feature right, of our organism. It can process about 45 pieces of information per second. And the subconscious can generate lots of sensations and emotions that are directed to be uh, felt and understood by the conscious mind. So it's very easy. There are many situations in which the subconscious can overwhelm the conscious mind with the intensity, say, of fear or anger or humiliation or whatever it might be. And so if someone is in a set of circumstances where the intensity of the negative emotions are overwhelming to the conscious mind, or, and that'd be like a highly traumatic event, an accident, a rape, war, etc., as seen in war, or if the conditions they're living in are ones where they're being taxed by a negative emotion and they don't know how to resolve, they don't know how to meet the underlying need. Perhaps they're in an abusive relationship and they're resentful all the time. Well, the smart move for the psyche is to sever the connection between that subconscious need and the conscious mind so that the resentment is never reaching and overwhelming the conscious mind, right? And so, in a sense, that's a move where the psyche pushes one of these needs offline. Okay, it's still in your system, it's still trying to do its job, but it's no longer connected to your conscious mind. That's how I define trauma. And if you define trauma that way, you begin to understand that we all have trauma. We all have done that at one point in our life, and most of us have inherited that trauma pattern from someone we grew up with. I lived in a household. My father was an engineer, very rational guy. And for him, there's no rational reason you should ever get angry, right? Because he conflated anger with the stereotypical behaviors that people engage in when they're in the emotional victimhood interpretation of their anger. And so I learned to suppress my anger. It wasn't acceptable to be angry, much less express anger. And so I traumatized myself. I severed my own connection to this need to assert my rights. And fortunately for me, I had an experience where I kind of lost it on someone, realized that no, I'm BSing myself. I get angry like actually quite often. And over a period of time, I became increasingly skillful at learning how to establish and assert my rights as a human being. I had been bullied a lot in school, stuff like that. I learned how to assert my rights, and people don't mess with me the way they used to. I'm somatically communicating that I'm someone who is going to demand respect and assert my rights. Well, that's very very than the Charles of 20 years ago. Okay. And in the process of becoming increasingly skillful at meeting that underlying need, my subconscious decided, oh, there's no longer any risk that we're going to overwhelm Charles's conscious mind if we send up all the flares of resentment and anger. He's very skillful at responding to those messages and getting us back on track to meet those needs. So I think that this becoming increasingly empathetically connected to and skillful at meeting our subconscious needs, that's actually, in my experience, the fastest path to helping a coaching client retire their trauma pattern, right? So trauma, when it's put in place, is adaptive to us. But when it ceases to be adaptive, when it's now in the way of us fulfilling our needs and harming with our values, then we can develop the skills and awarenesses so that our subconscious retires that pattern.
I love what you said there about this, severance that might be self-protection or contextual awareness. It's not socially acceptable to have a tantrum as an adult, but as a child, they don't know any different. Or to show anger in this way or in this way, acceptable, not acceptable, is contextual. It might be celebrated when it's shown in this environment, and it is actually frowned upon, and you're pushed out from promotion or from that room because you show it in that way. But you're then in dissonance of, you're not connected, you're not authentic, you're not connected in that way. And that might lead to a point where the straw breaks the camel's back, right? You talked about this, the bucket overwhelms and you suddenly respond to being able to, how can I live with that to be something that is good for me, good for my need, good for the outcome of the collective of humanity? And I think a lot of the awakening for us as a society and consciousness is to bring that into work, to be able to have a space in work where, for many years, it was about productivity, management, efficiency. A lot of that is going to shift to imagination, creativity, learning, and play, where technology is catching up to do all the things that are dangerous, dirty, and disgusting, and easy to replicate, where we can now give some space to learn, to play, to unlock things that have been hidden. So it's going to be an incredibly transformative space with a lot of need for adaptation of the rules, of the playbooks, of how people operate. Add in a few other factors: remote working, in person, all these other things of how do we sense people. And emotion is something that, for me, I find really hard to read virtually. When I'm in the same space as somebody, as I understand it, my triggers and evolution and the frequencies that I feel, all those subconscious flares, are more attuned. I'm not so attuned like this. So there's technology showing up to be able to go, okay, look at that video, and it shows all of the different things of, okay, they're confused at this, whatever, that I might interpret wrong because I don't know it, but subconsciously I do, but I'm not getting some of that data. So I find this stuff really fascinating, but at what point is it self-responsibility, management responsibility, and organizational responsibility to deal with this? And what's the advantage of each of those areas, from self to management and team to organizations, of opening this box called emotions, to deal with change in performance?
So what I have found most successful, and several failures on the way to this, several mistakes and failures on the way to this strategy, is I start with the senior leader of a group, okay, and we work together. And I also have coaches I've trained in my methodology. One of them will work with the senior leader until they are in a state of emotional responsibility with regard to the key emotions that show up in work. There's 7 that, if you get those right, those are, sort of the 80-20, if you will. And once that's done, then I'll come in and I will train them and their direct reports, them and their team. And within a couple weeks, the team has seen so many changes in their willingness to have conversations that in the past that would lead to blame or conflict that was difficult to resolve. They very quickly, when they realize they're in conflict about a strategy, they drop into a conversation about their needs and then collaborate on what they could do together that would meet both sets of needs. So conflict is, it's like this indication that you just need to shift perspective. And then unfailingly, then that senior leadership team will want to roll this out to the rest of the organization, because if you and I have a conflict and you're in a state of emotional victimhood, I'm in a state of emotional responsibility, if I can get you into a state of emotional responsibility, we can solve this much more quickly. So part of the leadership training is to simply ask questions of the other person that actually invite them into the state of emotional responsibility. And it's usually not that hard because it is natural to us. We've just been conditioned out of it. So, if I can if we're in a meeting and I have either enough affective empathy because we're in person and my mirror neurons are letting me know I'm feeling in my body what you're feeling in yours, or I have cognitive empathy because I'm picking up on the cues, what I can see from your facial expressions and stuff via Zoom. I also have a lot of context, so I have an idea of what needs might be up for you. But I notice you begin to, to scowl and whatnot, and I'm like, Ross, are you angry about something here? Is there a right you think you have that hasn't been honored in this conversation? Yeah, yeah, darn right. Right. You're proposing this change. It's going to impact my division more than anyone else's. You haven't even consulted with me on what the impact. I think I have a right to be involved in that decision and at a minimum provide you with feedback on how that's going to impact my division. I'm like, Ross, I'm completely in agreement with you. Absolutely. I agree you have that right. I apologize. So I said we're rolling this out. We're considering rolling this out. By when do you think you give me feedback on what the impact could be and which modifications you want made to the plan? And suddenly you stop looking angry because your subconscious is determined, okay, no, I'm on track to assert my right here. You actually start to feel empowered. And what's interesting is whether you're angry, feel angry or empowered, your physiology is the same. You were mentioning earlier that we were talking about Joe Dispenza. I think actually what many psychologists who have taken psychometric measurements of blood pressure and other stuff, what they've sort of missed is that if you're nervous or excited, you will have the same vital signs because nervous is what you feel when you're not on track to seize an opportunity, and excited is what you feel when you are on track to seize an opportunity. And seizing opportunities is a need that human beings have, right? So, another example of this that you were that came up in what you're sharing before is, and I talk about anger a lot because 90% of the people that I've done tests with in organizations, including senior executives, tend to interpret anger as you did something wrong. I have a right to punish you, right? Not, oh, no, I'm angry because I think I have a right to hold you accountable for not delivering on time. And let me get back on track to do that, and I'll shift into feeling empowered to do it. But anger tends to be a real problem in the workplace. In fact, the only people in the workplace that typically already have the emotional responsibility view of anger is the legal department, right? Because the law is all about establishing and asserting rights. But so the exemplar that I give for anger, arguably the angriest man in the 20th century was Mahatma Gandhi. And he writes extensively about his anger. And if anyone's seen the 3-hour movie with Ben Kingsley, he only exhibits the stereotypical response to anger once in the film, and that's actually with his wife, because he asks her to do something. She says, "No, I'm not going to do it," and his subconscious thinks he has a right as an Indian husband that she has to do whatever he says. He says, and she's like, "No, Gandaji, you've taught me, that I have rights, and whatnot." So, I think this new perspective shifts the attention to, well, do I repress or express my emotion, to how do I address the underlying subconscious need that I'm not on track to meet? And as soon as you shift to that state, then the reactivity that people have, the volatility, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn to appease people or whatever it is, that isn't actually being driven by the emotion. That occurs when the subconscious need doesn't get itself heard by the conscious mind. The conscious mind ignores it or tries to suppress it. And that need, if it's urgent, feels this urgency to take some sort of action, to take matters into its own hands, because it would much prefer to get the attention of the conscious mind and do it in partnership with the conscious mind. But that, quote, amygdala hijack, the amygdala does not generate fear. That's a misnomer. It detects and responds to threats. It houses our need to mitigate risks and assert rights and potentially enforce boundaries. That's what's going on in the amygdala. But it would much rather be in conversation and dialogue, like in my case in the Alps, than have to take matters into its own hands without having the benefit of this objective, rational thinking skills of the conscious mind.
I could talk to you for a long time, Charles. I am really enjoying this, but I am conscious of our time. And I had a couple of things. You mentioned 7 key emotions at work. What are they?
Um, do you, it, would your viewers appreciate having um, a little gift here?
Ah,
If I
they
can
would
share
love
my
it.
screen,
Yeah,
I'll show
share
you.
away. Some
I'll
people
show
listen
you
to
the
the
seven. I
audio.
find I
If
find
you're
most
listening to the
useful.
audio, there will be shareable links at the end of the show. But for those who are watching the version, do you want to just talk us quickly through what you're sharing there, Charles?
Sure, sure. So when I present this theory, I start off by distinguishing the conscious mind here from your subconscious needs, and I walk through each of these. But achieve goals, protect assets, right? These all show up at work. Achieve goals, that's obvious to everyone. Protect assets, my head count, my budget, my job, uh, my territory, mitigate risks. I gave the example of Intel. Assert my rights. Rights are hugely important. Stay in your lane. Roles and responsibilities. It's all about rights. Elicit consideration. I've, um, this can be apologies, courtesies, the courtesy of being listened to when you're speaking and someone's not on their cell phone, upholding your system of ethics, personifying ideals, right? And these are all very positive, very important needs for people individually and collectively to meet in the workplace. And the negative emotions to the left, there's this one-to-one relationship. If you're frustrated, it's always, always, always because you're not on track to achieve a goal. That's powerful information to have. And to understand that the emotion's calling on you, the conscious mind, to get back on track to meet the need or change or drop the need, right? That's often an option. And the positive emotion is you're getting these little hits of dopamine. Keep going. You're on track. Stay on track until you fulfilled the need, right? That's super important for us. So these are the 7 emotions I tend to teach first. Achieve goals tends to be the easiest one for people to initially understand and wrap their head around. Um, if it's a group where there's a lot of conflict or there's some like bad history in the organization, I'll then focus on anger and resentment, asserting rights and listening consideration, so that we fix kind of the social space. Then go back to kind of fear and anxiety being super important. Um, personify ideals. This can come up with like imposter syndrome as an example and whatnot. And but you want a workplace where people feel productive, safe, confident, empowered, respected, virtuous, and proud.
That's
So
really powerful, really
right.
powerful. And
So this is
it's-
like kind of level 1, and then
yeah,
level 2, I add another 13 emotions that are common in the workplace.
mm.
That include things like disappointment, which is huge to get into right relationship with if you want to make good investment decisions. Regret is super important if you want to learn from your mistakes. Grief is super important if you don't want to get stuck and this thing's been working so well for so long. It's not working anymore. Who moved my cheese? What am I going to do about this? Well, there's actually a neurological process. Your grief is calling on you, the conscious mind, to walk it through so that you can experience a sense of renewal and uh, openness to possibilities that be part of the unlearning piece.
Unlearning this labeling of emotion as being negative or positive, that they all just exist, and decoupling them from that these are signals to stimulate some kind of response, as you've put, to get back on track. fulfill whatever that underlying need is, I think is incredibly powerful and also freeing. It reminds me a little bit of the work around tactical empathy that Chris Voss talks about from Never Split the Difference, and his of labeling it sounds like you are, or it seems like when, in high stakes hostage negotiation, but then also when you're dealing with sales or getting somebody, hey, I want those sales figures for the report that I've got to do tomorrow, is, oh, it sounds like you're frustrated about this. If the person can, let's come up with solutions and do it collaboratively. And that can become a team sport in a highly productive team once they start to being able to be comfortable with these emotions as the stimulus of triggers for creativity and innovation around there. I really like that framing. I love that work. If people want to get in touch to discover more around your frameworks, the Penny Jones method, the framework around the emotional response ability, not responsibility framework, how do they get in touch, Charles? What's the best way for them to do that?
My website, so adaptivemastery.com.
And two final pieces. If have you got a 5 more minutes? I know we've run over time quite a bit. Are you okay?
Totally. Yes,
All right.
I booked more time just in case.
Okay. Appreciate that and thank you. Um, you've just mentioned there your website. Why is it called Adaptive Mastery, and what's your connection with the thought? Because that's, more than 20 years ago, you had that thought and insight. Why that, and why is that important? And then I'll finish off with the final question that I ask everybody on my show, which I hope one day might become a book or something. Who knows? Yeah. So tell me more about the name
Sure,
of the company and the institute.
sure. So when I began to understand that, um, the these that we have these subconscious needs, and that the subconscious needs are programmable. So when a baby is born, it exhibits a fear response in two situations: loud noises and heights. Nothing else. Everything else is learned. So your subconscious is learning, let's just stay with the need to protect assets. Your subconscious is learning, what are the situations where I need to protect an asset of mine, right? And the number and variety of those grow over time, right? Because it's not just my body, it's my parents, it's my toys, it's, my job, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And then what's the most effective strategy out there for protecting that asset when it's threatened in some way? Okay, and so then it accumulates that programming. Then how do I know whether I'm on track, whether my strategy is working sufficiently quickly or not? And I learned that as well. So this subconscious programming around my needs, uh, my strategies, and my assessment criteria, this subconscious programming grows and grows and grows. And this idea that our subconscious, these needs are reprogrammable, and that in fact is the source of our adaptability. That as environments change, as change, we choose change, or change is foisted upon us, whatever it might be, we need to update that subconscious programming as soon as possible. And oh my goodness, there's a built-in mechanism for doing that. And that's the arrival of a negative emotion to the conscious mind. It's the conscious mind's responsibility to update the subconscious programming. This is an elegant adaptive system as it is.
Beautiful.
So that's
Yeah.
so I believe this new type of emotional intelligence, right? The old type of emotional intelligence, your choice is you're either uh, uh, emotionally reactive or emotionally repressed. But this new type of emotional intelligence, the option is to be emotionally passionate, to live in the state of flow, to be a force of nature, to move through the world with the appropriate use of the conscious mind, not to censor what the subconscious is doing, but to operate in partnership with it to optimize your subconscious programming for the changing conditions that you face in life.
To apply the brake or the accelerator, not because you are an accelerator person, but because of the context, environment, and situation. And on another moment and another choice, you're the break person. That sometimes being responsive or collective, the choice and the empowerment to say, you're not labeled that way. It's you can intelligently choose and select, even from that same stimulus, dependent on the need or context or environment of those things.
So if you're an emotional victimhood, you are reacting to what's happening. If you're an emotional responsibility, you're responding to your own need.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is, and you talked about the importance of reflection, of being able to use those things, whether grief is a stimulant. Oh, you need to replay this. You need to reflect on it. How we now stimulate it to create new opportunities. Reimagine new solutions to be able to then recreate a new outcome from it. The final question, there's so much I want to go into, from Inside Out, the Pixar film, and as you grow up, and anger was one of the first beautiful characters in there with joy, and now the new Inside Out 2 with anxiety comes along, and those sorts of things, to more into Joe Dispenza's work, because I've got heavy into that, Charles. I'm on day 106 of daily meditation after going to one of his retreats, which has been beautiful for my wife and I. Don't know if you've seen his documentary film that came out in June called The Source. Fascinating. It's about an hour long, one of the largest studies into meditation in the world. So everything from blood samples, tear samples, fMRI, pre, during, and post, and what's going on in the body, how it deals with cancer cells, to all sorts, to regrowing a thyroid after somebody had it removed that was medically not possible, and all of these wonderful things. However, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
So what immediately comes to mind is on Thursday night, my wife and I went with another couple, dear friends of ours. We're dog park friends. Our puppies are like best friends, and we went to a cooking class together. It was my first cooking class that I had attended, and it was fascinating. I made several mistakes and learned quite a lot, and the food was pretty good at the end of the evening. But that was the last time I did something completely new.
Wonderful. I like that. I look forward to many more conversations with you, whether it's about dogs. My wife, I always joke with her because I understand the pecking order. It's our dogs for her, then our rescue chickens, all other animals, then me. So at least I know I'm first human, but that's her approach. So lots to talk about, of the joy and love of being pet owners and dog owners and doing things for the first time. I think it is a great way to, whether it's something you've actually done every day, to do it with new eyes and a new mind and naivety to do it, or it is genuinely the first time. That's a beautiful way to live, to learn, to observe, and especially adapt in our world where we're going to be facing more things for the first time than we have done before with each day. It's been a real pleasure and joy to hang out on the show together, to get to know more of your thinking. And my brain is really worrying, how can we get you involved with our community, some of our clients, some of our work, because I think you'd have a profound impact and effect. So I look forward to some collaborations. Watch this space.
Thank you. I look forward to the same. Thank you, Ross.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQ Me assessment. AQAI. transforming the way people, teams, and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favourite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.